What is going on here with what seem like a deluge of potential incursions? What are these objects? Where are they coming from? What is their purpose? And are we experiencing an increase of the so-called unidentified aerial objects, or are we just looking for them more carefully? Late Saturday, NORAD and Northcom said there was a radar anomaly over your state, which is why airspace was closed.
The night the radar went silent, the mystery in the skies. It began, as so many mysteries do, not with a flash of light in the sky, but with silence on a radar screen. In the early hours of a calm spring night, deep within a secure air defense control room, a technician watched as a single, unmarked blip appeared where there should have been empty air. At first it seemed like nothing, a faint return, perhaps a false echo caused by atmospheric interference. But within minutes, the signal shifted, split, and then accelerated in a way that no aircraft known to humanity could. It was impossible. And yet, there it was. A target moving erratically across restricted airspace, descending from 10,000 feet to near ground level, then shooting upward at speeds exceeding Mach 2 before vanishing completely. Across the console, another radar operator looked up, confusion etched across his face. "Is that real?" he asked. The senior officer leaned forward, studying the data. "It's on both screens," he said quietly. "That means it's solid." And just like that, what began as a routine monitoring shift became the start of one of the most disturbing and well-documented radar anomalies ever recorded. The birth of an unsolved case. The incident unfolded over a European region blanketed with NATO surveillance in the late 20th century, a time when Cold War tensions had turned the night sky into a chessboard of strategic defense. At 11:00 p.m. local time, air defense centers received reports of strange lights moving in formation above civilian towns. Residents described large triangular shapes, silent and slow-moving, unlike any jet or helicopter. Military radar confirmed something was there, but it wasn't behaving like an aircraft. It seemed to play with the radar locks, allowing operators to track it briefly before fading out completely, as though aware of the detection systems watching it. Soon, F-16 fighters were scrambled. Their orders, intercept and identify, but what they encountered would defy every rule of aerial physics. Contact. At 11:20 p.m., two Belgian Air Force F-16s, call signs Alpha Victor 1 and Charlie Mike 2, took off from Beauvaisin Air Base. Within minutes, their onboard radar systems began to pick up what ground control had already confirmed: multiple unknown contacts. They were instructed to lock onto the nearest one. For a moment, the lock held. Then the target dropped, in a matter of seconds, from 9,000 feet to 500 feet. The pilot's voice crackled through the radio. "Target descending rapidly. Impossible speed. I'm losing lock." A second pilot confirmed similar behavior on his screen. The radar warning tones blared. The object was not only accelerating vertically, it was jamming their targeting systems. Ground radar confirmed it. Three unknowns, performing maneuvers that broke every known aerodynamic limit. This wasn't swamp gas, or a meteor, or a balloon. Something tangible was moving through Belgian airspace, something capable of outmaneuvering advanced fighter jets. Civilian eyes. What makes this incident even more unsettling is that it wasn't just military radar picking up these anomalies. Hundreds of civilians on the ground saw them too. Over small towns like Wavre, Namur, and Liège, residents described seeing massive triangular crafts with bright lights at each corner, moving slowly, almost deliberately, through the night. Police officers filed reports. Photos were taken. In some cases, people described a faint humming sound, like electrical energy pulsing in the air. This convergence of radar data and human testimony created one of the strongest UAP cases in recorded history. It wasn't just seen, it was tracked, measured, and confirmed by multiple independent sources. The data that shouldn't exist. After the night of March 30th, 1990, Belgian military analysts spent weeks combing through radar logs, telemetry data, and pilot recordings. What they found only deepened the mystery. Radar from Glan's control station showed abrupt vertical movements, some exceeding 1,000 feet per second. Thermal imaging picked up no heat signatures consistent with jet engines, and the object's radar cross-section was inconsistent, fluctuating as if it could alter its reflective surface. To this day, radar engineers say that such flight behavior should produce massive sonic booms or structural disintegration, but none were recorded. The sky was silent. It's as though whatever was up there wasn't obeying the same physical laws as our aircraft. The experts step in. When the data was presented to scientists, physicists, and aerospace engineers, the reactions were cautious and uneasy. Professor Auguste Meessen of the Catholic University of Louvain, one of the few academics to directly analyze the radar data, stated, "These movements are not compatible with known aircraft or meteorological phenomena." Meteorological experts ruled out temperature inversions, astronomers ruled out Venus or meteors, and defense analysts ruled out secret military aircraft, citing lack of sonic boom, lack of propulsion noise, and the coordinated radar confirmation by multiple installations. This was not an isolated glitch. It was a coordinated detection by both ground and air systems across multiple frequencies, all pointing to one conclusion. Something unknown was in controlled flight. The military's dilemma. Belgium's Air Force faced a serious problem. They had a radar-verified aerial intrusion over NATO airspace with no explanation. If it was a foreign craft, it represented a massive breach of sovereignty. If it wasn't, then it represented something even more unsettling. In an unprecedented move, the Belgian Air Force went public. Colonel Wilfried de Brouwer, chief of operations at the time, held a press conference. He didn't deny the events. He didn't call them hoaxes or misidentifications. Instead, he stated, "The Air Force could not identify the nature, origin, or intent of the phenomena observed. There were no indications of hostility, but we cannot rule out advanced technology." That single statement sent ripples across Europe. For the first time, a NATO-aligned nation had officially acknowledged an unidentified craft, backed by radar, visual, and military confirmation, without dismissing it as a weather anomaly. Echoes across the world. The Belgian radar incident didn't happen in isolation. It came during a wave of sightings across the late 1980s and early 1990s, from Britain's Rendlesham Forest to the Hudson Valley Lights in New York. Each involved trained observers, police, pilots, or radar operators, reporting structured craft with triangular or disc-like shapes performing impossible maneuvers. It was as though the sky itself had become a testing ground for something beyond our comprehension. But what was it? That question haunted scientists and intelligence analysts alike. Some argued it was a prototype stealth aircraft from the United States, possibly linked to black projects like the F-117 or B-2, which were secret at the time. Others dismissed that theory, noting that no stealth aircraft could hover silently, accelerate vertically, or sustain such flight without noise or heat. Still others whispered a more unsettling possibility, that this technology wasn't ours at all. Inside NATO's silent response declassified documents show that NATO allies quietly reviewed radar data from neighboring countries after the incident. Britain, France, and Germany all confirmed similar unidentified radar returns around the same time frame. The internal conclusion was vague. Anomalous aerial events under analysis. But no joint public statement ever came. Instead, silence. Officially, the Belgian UFO wave was labeled unexplained. Unofficially, it became a case study in modern radar tracking and the limitations of human understanding when confronted with something beyond expected behavior. Public reaction. For civilians, the event sparked a cultural shift. Television stations aired interviews with witnesses. Newspapers ran headlines calling it the Belgian Triangle. Documentaries speculated about secret technology or extraterrestrial origins. But through it all, one thing stood out: the credibility of the witnesses. Police officers, air traffic controllers, and military pilots all described the same shapes, the same silent flight, the same impossible speed. And the government didn't call them liars. They called them witnesses to an unidentified phenomenon. That honesty, rare in an age of secrecy, made Belgium's 1990 radar case stand apart. The quiet truth. 3 decades later, the radar tapes from that night remain among the most rigorously documented UAP data in history. Scientists continue to study them, comparing the readings with modern radar returns from recent U.S. Navy encounters off the coasts of Florida and California. The similarities are unsettling. Acceleration without visible propulsion, objects appearing and disappearing on radar as if slipping between frequencies. Behavior suggesting intelligence, but not aggression. It's as though the same phenomenon has followed humanity across time, adapting to our level of technology. When we had telescopes, it was seen in the stars. When we built aircraft, it followed us into the skies. And now, with advanced radar, it meets us there, on the screens we trust most. A mystery that refuses to die. The Belgian radar case didn't end with answers. It ended with questions, questions that echo through modern air defense systems to this day. How can multiple radar installations track something that doesn't produce heat, sound, or a consistent radar signature? Why do these objects appear only briefly, as if testing our limits? And perhaps most haunting of all, who or what is behind them? The official files remain open, but classified portions suggest one thing. Whatever was flying over Belgium that night was far beyond human capability at the time. And perhaps still is. Because the story doesn't end in 1990. From Europe to North America, radar operators continue to report echoes that don't belong, objects that defy physics, targets that appear and vanish in seconds. It's a reminder that even in the age of satellites and spaceflight, there are still things above us, watching, moving, existing, that we cannot explain. The data war. When science met the unexplainable. After the night sky over Belgium lit up with radar echoes and silent triangles, the real battle began, not in the air, but in laboratories, radar control rooms, and government offices. This was no longer about lights. It was about data, raw, verifiable, military-grade data that refused to fit into any known pattern of technology or natural phenomena. The investigation that followed became one of the most exhaustive studies of unidentified aerial events in modern history. Every radar pulse, every pilot recording, every piece of telemetry was analyzed, debated, and reanalyzed, as if the answer to the unknown could be buried somewhere in the noise. But the more they studied it, the more impossible it seemed. Radar anomalies, or controlled flight. The Belgian Air Force, led by Colonel Wilfried de Brouwer, opened a detailed review of all radar contacts from March 30-31, 1990. They brought in engineers from Belgo Control, civilian radar experts, and NATO liaisons to verify that the detections weren't caused by common radar distortions such as side lobes or atmospheric reflections. The first hypothesis was simple. Could the radar have glitched? But the data quickly ruled that out. Both Glon's radar station and Semerzaki Control Center, 2 independent installations over 100 kilometers apart, picked up the same unknown targets, at the same time moving in sync. These weren't random echoes, they were synchronized, trackable objects under apparent intelligent control. Radar operators reported unusual target behavior. The objects accelerated vertically at rates of over 30 G, far beyond what any human pilot could endure. They hovered motionless for minutes, then darted off instantly without transition. No known jet, not even experimental, could replicate that profile. One controller later remarked in an internal report, if it was a glitch, it was the smartest glitch in NATO history. The pilot's perspective. To understand what happened that night, investigators turned to the two men who faced the phenomenon up close. The F-16 pilots scrambled from Beauvais Air Base. Their testimonies were chillingly consistent. Upon takeoff, both aircraft were guided toward the radar contacts over eastern Belgium. Initially, the targets were stationary, hovering near 10,000 feet. As the jets approached, the objects began to move, not away, but upward, vanishing from one radar frequency only to reappear on another seconds later. At one point, a lock-on was achieved by one jet's onboard radar. The pilot prepared to close the distance when suddenly the object dove from 9,000 feet to under 500 feet in less than 2 seconds. That's an acceleration of over 30 times the force of gravity. Even the F-16's digital systems couldn't keep up. The lock broke instantly. The radar displayed a cascade of error messages as if the target was moving too fast for the sensors to compute. Then, it vanished entirely. For both pilots, it wasn't just what they saw, it was what they felt. Their aircraft instruments behaved erratically, warning systems triggered for no reason, and communication with ground control briefly distorted, filled with static. As one pilot later told investigators, it was like chasing a ghost that knew exactly where we were going next. The theories begin. When the Belgian Air Force published its official post-operation report, the world's scientific community took notice. Within days, meteorologists, physicists, and radar specialists began offering explanations. Some claimed the radar targets were caused by temperature inversions, a meteorological phenomenon where layers of warm and cold air can reflect radar signals, creating false blips. But that explanation collapsed under scrutiny. Temperature inversions create stationary radar ghosts. They don't move, accelerate, or shift altitude across hundreds of miles, and they certainly don't match the movements captured by two F-16 radars locked in combat mode. Others proposed plasma balls or electrical discharges in the atmosphere, perhaps linked to geomagnetic activity. Yet that didn't account for the synchronized visual sightings on the ground, the huge black triangles seen by dozens of police officers, all matching the radar tracks. In the end, each hypothesis failed the same test. None could explain all the evidence simultaneously, radar, visual, and infrared data combined. What remained was something no one wanted to say out loud. The events of that night pointed to technology beyond the reach of human capability in 1990. The lock-on data that shook the military. Among all the evidence, one piece stood above the rest: the digital flight data from the F-16 radar systems. The tapes were recorded automatically during the pursuit. When engineers replayed them, they discovered multiple confirmed locks on unknown targets performing extreme maneuvers. Acceleration curves, speed calculations, and altitude changes were mathematically impossible. At one point, the data showed the object descending at over 40,000 feet per minute, without sonic boom, without engine noise, without sonic boom, without engine noise, and without structural breakup. It wasn't just fast, it was impossible by known physics. NATO analysts cross-checked this data against known aircraft signatures, American, Soviet, even classified prototypes. None matched. The closest pattern they found was nothing. And that's when the conversations turned from "what is it?" to "what if it's not ours?" A silent visit from the Allies. In the weeks after the incident, American defense representatives quietly arrived in Brussels. Officially, they were there for routine NATO consultation. Unofficially, they wanted access to the radar recordings. The United States, known for its stealth and black-budget programs, was concerned that one of its classified craft, perhaps a prototype like the B-2 Spirit or Aurora, had been detected abroad. But after reviewing the Belgian data, U.S. analysts privately dismissed that idea. The recorded maneuvers were not only beyond U.S. capabilities, they were beyond possibility. Even classified aircraft still obeyed the laws of physics. One visiting engineer from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was quoted off the record saying, "If that's one of ours, then someone forgot to tell physics." That quiet comment echoed through the halls of Belgium's Air Force headquarters. Because if it wasn't ours, and it wasn't theirs, then whose was it? Enter the scientist's Professor Auguste Meessen, a physicist at Louvain University, became one of the few academics granted full access to the radar files. For months, he pored over the data, comparing it to meteorological models and radar frequency behavior. He confirmed the authenticity of the readings. The radar systems were functioning properly. The detections were not errors. But what intrigued him most were the flight patterns, sudden shifts, controlled accelerations, and geometric formations suggesting deliberate movement. He noted in his report, "The objects showed signs of intelligent control. They reacted to the presence of aircraft and radar beams, as if aware of observation." To Meessen, this wasn't proof of extraterrestrial origin. It was proof that something unknown, possibly experimental technology or a new physical phenomenon, was operating intelligently within our atmosphere. His conclusion was cautious but clear. These were not illusions. Something was there. The psychology of the unknown. As the investigation deepened, another question emerged. How does the human mind process something it cannot explain? Military psychologists were brought in to interview witnesses, not to discredit them, but to understand the stress of encountering the impossible. What they found was consistency. Unlike typical mass sightings influenced by rumor or hysteria, the witnesses in Belgium had seen different aspects of the same event, from different locations, at different times, yet described the same structure. A massive, silent triangular craft with lights at its corners and a red pulse at its center. The descriptions were so specific that even skeptical investigators admitted, if this was psychological projection, it was the most coordinated one in history. This wasn't imagination, it was observation. The secret radar tapes. For years, rumors persisted that not all radar data from that night was released. Whispers among NATO technicians spoke of additional tapes, one showing a fourth unidentified object tracked over northern France shortly after the Belgian event. According to internal memos later leaked to the press, this secondary contact was moving at hypersonic speed before abruptly disappearing. The data was quickly classified. Officially, the Belgian Air Force denied possession of any additional recordings. Unofficially, those who handled the data claimed otherwise. One retired officer later said anonymously, "There were more tracks than the public was told. They didn't fit the narrative of an isolated event." If true, that would mean the 1990 radar anomaly wasn't a single-night incident, but part of a larger, regional pattern of unidentified aerial intrusions across Western Europe. Technological limits and new questions. As the 1990s progressed, radar technology evolved. Systems became digital, more resistant to noise, and equipped with Doppler processing capable of filtering false echoes, and yet similar anomalies continued. Even with advanced sensors, operators reported blips that appeared briefly, performed impossible trajectories, then vanished into thin air. In the early 2000s, British, Italian, and French defense departments quietly opened parallel inquiries into their own radar anomalies, all inspired by Belgium's precedent. Each ended the same way, unexplained but verified. This raised an even deeper question. If the technology to detect them keeps improving and the anomalies remain, then maybe the problem isn't with the radar. Maybe the problem is with us, our understanding of what's really in the sky. The human cost of mystery. For the Belgian pilots, the experience stayed with them for decades. Some left aviation altogether, haunted by what they couldn't explain. Others became advocates for transparency in UAP research, arguing that denying such events only deepens public distrust. One of them later said in a rare interview, "You're trained to understand your instruments, your radar, your eyes." That night, none of them agreed, and when your tools fail you, you start questioning reality itself. That psychological strain, the intersection of belief, data, and the unknown became a recurring theme in UAP investigations worldwide. The turning point. By the mid-1990s, Belgium's Air Force quietly closed the official inquiry. The case remained open in public archives as unresolved. But privately, a new initiative began, the collection of unidentified radar returns across Europe, shared through NATO channels under the label Uncorrelated Aerial Phenomena. It was the quiet birth of what would later become modern UAP tracking. And though it started in the heart of Europe, its echoes would eventually reach across the Atlantic, influencing how the United States would investigate its own radar anomalies decades later. Because the technology that once puzzled Belgium would one day help identify similar objects above the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the same kind seen by U.S. Navy pilots and tracked by advanced radar systems in the 2000s. The connection was undeniable. A window into the unknown 3 decades later, experts reviewing the Belgian case agree on one thing. Whatever those objects were, they represented something intelligently controlled and technologically advanced, something that ignored our understanding of flight. Maybe they were the first visible trace of a classified aerospace revolution, one that humanity wasn't meant to see yet. Or maybe they were the first sign that we were never alone in our own skies. Echoes from the unknown, the legacy of the Belgian radar mystery. For decades, the events of March 1990 have hovered over the scientific and defense communities like a ghost, visible, measurable, undeniable, yet impossible to name. What began as a series of radar anomalies above the skies of Belgium became something much larger, a mirror reflecting the limits of human understanding, the fragility of our technology, and the unshakable question that still haunts air defense networks today. What exactly was flying in our skies that night? The case that wouldn't die. When Belgium's official investigation quietly concluded in the mid-1990s, it did so with one word stamped across the final report: unexplained. There was no closing statement, no debunking, and no confession of experimental aircraft. For scientists, that single word was both a dead end and a beginning. Because unexplained doesn't mean imaginary. It means the data still stands, and it refuses to conform. Civilian researchers across Europe continued where the military stopped. Groups like SOBEPS, the Belgian Society for the Study of Space Phenomena, collected thousands of eyewitness accounts, photos, and independent radar records. The consistency was overwhelming: large, triangular craft, silent, capable of impossible speeds, seen and tracked by professionals and civilians alike. By the late 1990s, even skeptics were forced to admit that the Belgian UFO wave was one of the best documented aerial phenomena in modern history. It wasn't a rumor, it wasn't hysteria, it was real data, but still, no one could say what it was. NATO's silent reforms behind closed doors, NATO's air defense infrastructure changed dramatically after the incident. Radar protocols were updated to store high-fidelity echo archives, digital snapshots of unidentified contacts that could be analyzed later in detail.